All right, we don't have a huge crowd today. And Pat is right. She said, I think this congregation is more afraid of hot weather than they are of snow, which, fair enough. Okay. All right, we'll get started with the few that we have. I'm going to turn my mic up a little bit. The Lord be with you. That's the Lutheran way of telling you to shut up and sit down. And also with you, which is the Lutheran way of saying we heard you. You don't need to yell. Let me start with a little bit of a rant. Although I've lost the amount. So Elen is out. She's hiking Silver Falls State Park this morning, which is beautiful. If you haven't been, Silver Falls is great. But there's no dogs allowed at Silver Falls. So the dogs stayed home this morning, so I was walking them. And by and large, I generally walk the dogs between 8 and 10. I don't go early, but this morning I had to go early to be here on time. And one of the reasons I don't go early is I don't like waking up that early. But the other reason is the off-leash people tend to walk their dogs early in the morning, and Macaron doesn't do well with that. And that's a whole other rant about off-leash dogs in public places. So this morning, I was walking. Does anybody know where Burlingham Park is? If you don't live in that neighborhood, it's a nice little park that's over in South Burlingham. It's by Capitol Hill Elementary, if you know where that school is. Anyways. It's got this big open field because there's a baseball diamond there. So there's a couple of like t-ball teams and stuff that play and practice them. But you can come in the backside of the park through a trail. So I've got this nice little loop that I do that goes underneath Terwilliger and then over to Burlingham Park, and then I make this big loop back. It's about 2.5 miles once I get it all done. So I'm coming out of the trail into the park, and I see a woman walking towards me, and she's probably a good 200 feet away. But she's got a leash over her shoulder, which I know right away means that there's a dog running around somewhere, and I don't see a dog near her, meaning that it's somewhere else. And so immediately I go into like hyper alert, trying to figure out where this dog is. And I see it. It's about 50 feet on my left, running around in the woods. And I can tell right away it's not going to be like an aggressive dog. There's all those like golden variations. It's some kind of like retriever something, but it's got darker hair than a golden retriever does. I don't know. It's one of those dogs that you pay $10,000 for a puppy or whatever. That's your prerogative. So I see the dog, and I'm like, the dog takes a look at us and goes back sniffing, like, okay, we're fine. So I'm like, I just want to get out of here as fast as possible. Well, of course, my dogs want to sniff and smell, so we're moving as fast as we can. Well, as soon as, I'm just about made my way out of the zone, and I hear the woman yelling, Sadie, Sadie. I'm like, of course her name's Sadie. Which is, if you want to name your dog Sadie, that's fine, but I was stereotyping a little bit. And I see Sadie running over towards us, and I'm like, crap, here we go. So what I have to do is, basically I sacrifice Madeline, which is I use her to do dog small talk. So I let her, because I've got him leashed to my waist, I let her go out and sniff and smell the other dog, and I basically have to keep Macaron over on my side. Well, the lady is 200 feet away, and Sadie is right up in our business. And Macaron does good for about 10 seconds. We've got him trained to where he knows he's supposed to try and stay calm, but like after 10 seconds, he's like, nope, this dog is in my business, stranger danger, and he'll start barking. Well, she's half a football field away from me. So I'm sitting here trying to wrangle one dog. Meanwhile, this dog, and Sadie is bouncing around like an idiot because there's not probably 2 brain cells in that dog's head. So, and I hear the lady, Sadie, Sadie, and oh, I'm so sorry. I'm like, I don't want you to be sorry. I just want you to have your dog on leash. Anyways, so that was how I started my day. And the rest of the walk, I just had angry thoughts about off-leash dogs everywhere, which, whatever. Welcome to Portland. We're going to wrap this up today, and that's fine. Social statements are big, and I think if we ever really want, and I'll wait until this one eventually gets published, which there will be a final form that comes out, and generally there's a study guide. And so what we might do is when they finally publish this and they develop a study guide, we can come back and revisit it. One of the main reasons that I wanted to look at this now is because it tied in with our general theme of civics, with having Scott speak. And it's very pertinent to just kind of our public conversation right now in terms of what's going on with our federal administration and how it's affecting our governance across the United States. And it's important to understand that we collectively have a voice to contribute. Even though I'm not sure that the federal administration honestly knows that we exist, aside from the fact that apparently we're money launderers. I'm harking back to the tweet that Elon Musk did back in February about Lutherans and our immigration money laundering scam that we're perpetuating, which he probably forgot about the half a second after he tweeted that. Anyways, I think it's important to understand that we as Lutherans, as ELCA Lutherans, collectively have a voice, and that's what this document is contributing. It's saying, here's, based on our theological underpinnings, based off of how we are organized as a church, and based off of how we as Lutherans engage in society, here's what we have to say about what our responsibility as churches and what our responsibility as people participating in this civilization have. So, again, I'm kind of summarizing what I've talked about in these last few weeks, but that's my justification for looking at this rough draft document now. We got through 2 sections out of 6. Today, I'm just going to kind of hop through the last 4, but trying to aim towards the end to look at the summary, because that's probably the important part. But just a little bit of house cleaning business. I'm gone the next 2 weeks, so there's no adult ed. We aren't going to start adult ed up until September 7th, so the first Sunday in September. I'll be back in Portland the 28th of August, but that's going to be Labor Day weekend is the next Sunday, and I assume there isn't going to be anybody here. It'll just be me. Me and Mike. Or are you going to be gone too, Mike? Never know. So we'll be starting up September 7th. I haven't decided upon a topic yet. If you've got anything that has been bouncing around in your head, shoot me an email. Otherwise, I've got a couple of ideas that I'm floating. As always, when I do a topical thing, I usually want to swing back towards biblical or theological stuff. So it'll probably be something in that vein. I've got a couple of ideas. I'll leave it at that. I'll probably have a firmer idea when I get back from 24 hours in the car. Well, more like 40 hours in the car, 80 hours, front and back. Anyways, I do a lot of thinking when I'm driving to Michigan and back. That's a good way to put it. So no adult ed for the next 3 weeks, and then we'll pick back up again in September with something new. Just one prayer concern. Anthony was supposed to preach today, Anthony had an emergency appendectomy on Tuesday. So he thought he had gallstones last Sunday. Turns out no, his appendix he had appendicitis. So he's doing well, he's recovering, but he's going to be off his feet for time being. He's hopeful that he's going to be able to start seminary in basically a week. So, but he could use your prayers in the meantime. Okay, let's talk things. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna read the introductory paragraphs for each of the 4 final sections, and then we can kind of talk about what we want to talk about. And oh shoot, I really wish there was an easy way to scroll on this. What page is this? Oh my gosh, that's page 21. So I'm gonna just go back up to show us all the sections. So we already talked about, foundational teaching. That was 2-3 weeks ago. And this was the document basically articulating the things that ground us as Lutherans and how that starts to inform our understanding of ourselves as participating in a civic society. One of the major pieces was talking about the source of power, if you remember that. That all power comes from God, right? So power is a gift and a responsibility, not an entitlement and a privilege. Last week we talked about section 2, and it was mainly around civic participation. And so we kind of word mapped the different ways in which we as citizens participate in our civic responsibility. And, we had a bunch of great stuff up there. And of course, one of the major things that this document talks about in response to kind of the current federal stance is valuing people who work for the government, valuing government employees as those who are both working for an income, but also out of a sense of service to us, to we the people. Section 3, which is one we can look at today, is essentially assessing it's literally the title, assessing the U.S. constitutional form of government. And again, I've mentioned it before. I cannot help but read Dietrich Bonhoeffer into everything in this document. And I might sound like a broken record here, but Dietrich Bonhoeffer in his ethics talks extensively about this relationship between church and state. And specifically, he talks extensively about the responsibility of the church with regards to the state. And I've mentioned it every week. You got the 3 roles. Make sure the government is doing what it says it's going to do. Care for the people who are wounded by the government. And then if the government stops functioning as a government, stick a stick in the spokes. Stop the wheel from turning. But primarily, I think where we as church function are in this first 2. That third is an emergency measure. So where we live with regards to our federal, state, and local governments is primarily in our responsibility as church is to make sure it's doing what it says it's going to do, that's what this section is all about. What is our government? Who are we? How did we organize? What are our foundational principles? And one of the things that takes a lot of time on, I'm going to go into Article 25 here. The most radical feature of the Constitution is its first 3 words. We the people. And to elaborate, this phrase indicates a preference for mutual self-determination. We'll come back to that. Though originally that preference was largely limited to property-owning white males. True. Over time, constitutional amendments have expanded the right of mutual self-determination through voting. What do you think? What does that mean? Mutual self-determination. Let's start with self-determination. What does that mean?
Everyone has a right to express their opinions.
Absolutely. And to express their opinions and to live their life as they want to live it, right? That's also in there. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are the things that are guaranteed to us. Self-determination means that I get to do what I want to do, by and large. But what does mutual self-determination mean? You're responsible to the other, and we get to determine what we want to do. It's placing an emphasis on communal responsibility. We are not governed by individuals. We are governed by a collective. Insofar as that, my vote is important, but really the most important thing is our vote, right? And it sounds like a bit of a semantics, but it's really important. one of the social emphases in our society is on individualism. You know, we talk about Americans and their rugged individualism, and sometimes that's lifted up as a negative. It's not necessarily, right? This is kind of for me, a really kind of cool thing about our understanding of who we are, is that we get to be who we want to be. I get to be me, right? My identity doesn't have to be subsumed into the collective, right? Which is, you know, from how we would often articulate it, is where you tend to drift towards a concept of communism, right? Which is differentiated from socialism, which is your identity is only important in the collective, right? Your identity is assumed into the identity of the state in that case. No, it's we the people. I am important. But one of the things that tends to happen with that is we place all this emphasis on the I, and we miss out on the importance of the I and the we, right? Which is that, yeah, the government is supposed to serve me, but only me in the context of we. And this, you know, this is really important from a Lutheran standpoint when we start talking about concepts that I was talking about last week in terms of abundance and scarcity. Because if you understand that the government is supposed to serve you, in order for you to thrive, somebody else has to lose, then that means that we are not functioning as a government. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And if all you have is a collection of I's, with every I competing against the other I, for the government to serve me, it's not going to work. It's never going to work. And one of the things that we're watching, you know, is wealth being accumulated in the hands of the few at the cost of the many. You know, that's a very good example of the I's overwhelming the we's, you know. So, mutual self-determination. We the people, this document comes back to over and over. And I'm going to jump ahead. Actually, I can read 26 through 28. Then I'm going to stop. Then we'll skip to section 4. So I remember to get there. This social statement identifies both theological and constitutional criteria to assess government authority and its activities. So in other words, we're looking at it from a religion standpoint and from a civic standpoint. This article describes several specific applications of those criteria and specific questions to help assess governmental bodies or policies, laws, and regulations. Okay. Finally, well, two finallys. The Constitution forbids religious tests for U.S. office holders. What does that mean? You don't have to be blank to be blank, right? You don't have to be Christian to be American. You don't have to be Protestant to be president. And we've watched, this is a great idea in theory, but in the course of your lifetimes, we've watched this concept expand. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, right? First Catholic in the White House. Blew people up. Now, you know, well, how many years later? 60 years later, you know, Joseph R. Biden, another Catholic in the White House. Oh, heaven forbid, you know. Barack Obama, first black man in the White House. We as an American people have grown, you know, so we, G-R-O-W-N, not G-R-O-A-N. We have grown over time into the words that we express in our Constitution, right? And this is the fascinating thing for me, is we do this with everything, not just our governmental constitution, but even our church constitution. These are the ideals that we express, and a lot of times the reality doesn't live up to the ideal, and yet we strive towards that ideal. We don't water down that ideal to match our reality. Okay. And then finally, following up on this, the U.S. sovereign is not we the Christians, okay, but we the people. The U.S. governing structure and authority is not fundamentally Christian in origin, structure, or intent. Okay, and then I could spend weeks on this one because this is one of those things that goes both directions. We tend to think of it as primarily, we shouldn't have the church interfering in the state, and that can certainly be harmful to the state, to the we the people, especially when we make Christian synonymous with a U.S. citizen, right? Obviously, that can be detrimental to people that don't fall into that category. So that means if you're a different faith, potentially a different color. Yeah, Susan.
Hegseth last couple of days by a right-wing fundamentalist Christian
Yeah.
pastor, something about the good old days when women didn't have the vote and
Yeah.
family values were. And this is someone this week
Yeah.
espousing those.
Yeah, I think it's a right-wing reaction to what's been going on in the last 25 years. You know, they're basically, they don't really believe in what's being stated there. They believe in the I. They believe in their right as a Christian church to dominate and rule.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's a combination of, I think there is intent. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think that there are people in the current administration, Republican or otherwise, that intentionally want to, and they use the word return, which is, it's already a falsehood. They want to return to this idea of the U.S. as a Christian country, which has never been. In fact, the white men who founded this country, a lot of them weren't Christians. They were deists at best. But I'm not here to judge the faith of our founding fathers. But I think it's also just ignorance, by and large. I mean, and this, I'm not trying to be mean or derogatory here, but a lot of the people that have been put in positions of power in the current administration are not the shining gems of intelligence and information that we would like to see in those positions. And you know, however you feel about Pete Hegseth, he's the equivalent of I mean, I don't want to. He's way above his head. He's in above his head in a lot of ways. And to be fair to him, he's not the only person that posts tasteless things on Facebook. Okay, there are plenty of Americans in either political camp that are constantly posting inappropriate things on Facebook, right? And I'm not a both sides person, but I'm both sides of the aisle. You know, the fact is, he's doing it from a position of authority, and that's the problem. That's the issue, right? He can put out whatever he wants on Facebook. That's what the First Amendment guarantees, his right to do that. Just not as somebody who holds great power in our government. But yeah, I know that concerns me as well too, especially when we talk about this. Because ultimately, I think the church is hurt more by this because we turn God we diminish God when we try to make God synonymous with the U.S. government. But that's my bias. Okay, I'm going to jump ahead to Article 4, and this is what we just talked about. Oh boy. Religion and the First Amendment. I went way ahead to 6. Okay. Yeah, okay. The First Amendment begins with 2 clauses. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. The Establishment Clause. Hopefully you learned about this in your civics class. Comma, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, known as the Free Exercise Clause. So you've got these 2 pillars of the First Amendment, and with regards to religion especially. Number 1, Congress isn't a church. Congress can't establish any norm for religion. And number 2, it also can't restrict your expression of religion. Andy.
Okay, so then about 70 years ago, we the people.
Yeah.
Yes, and then
under God.
I'm sorry, but that is a direct conflict.
I don't disagree. In fact, I had a sermon that I preached like a year and a half ago on give to Caesar what is Caesar, is talking about Theodore Roosevelt, one of the greatest presidents in the history of our country, and his issue with putting that phrase under God on coins, right? And then fast forward 50 years and
how about the Pledge of Allegiance?
I know you're preaching to the choir here, and of course that used to be middle ground, right? That used to be something that we were okay with, we're not necessarily happy about. But that ball has moved so far, so far in recent times that the Pledge of Allegiance now feels like a safe space. In fact, I was reflecting upon this. I pledge allegiance not to the president, but to the flag and to the United States of America, or to the flag and to the republic for which it stands. One nation. Man, if we could get back to that, right? Rather than, the nation of, Republicans and the nation of Democrats. Okay, so establishment clause. Government essentially can't form a state religion, right? It can't say that you have to be this to be this, okay? And it can't restrict your freedom to be who you want to be, okay? Sounds pretty simple. I'm going to hop forward and just read a couple of these articles. Article 31. These clauses, I'm paraphrasing, work together to promote religious diversity, obviously. This means that each religious community can gather and worship as it chooses, and that each community and its members can engage in public life on an equal basis with all others. And this is where the rubber hits the road in a lot of ways. Brenda sent me an article by Diana Butler Bass talking about this specific thing. This is one of the scary pieces that's happening right now, which is we are witnessing preference being given to specific aspects of religious life in America. And I hate to break it to you, we're on the bad end of that deal, okay? We've been identified, we as mainline Protestantism, so ELCA, PCU, Presbyterian Church, Episcopalian Church, basically anybody who doesn't bow the knee, so to speak, we're having our grants taken away, and that's step one. We're having our funding taken away. We have already watched it happen with Lutheran Community Services, okay? That was just the tip of the iceberg, okay? There are so many different para-religious nonprofits and religious nonprofits in the United States of America that do good work in our communities. And there seems to be an intent in the federal administration to begin to essentially require loyalty tests of denominations and churches insofar as that whatever little pieces of money that you're getting to do the work that you want to do, you're going to have to pledge allegiance to the administration in order to get that. And this is the issue at hand, right? Is this idea of engaging in public life on an equal basis. And that's a relatively extreme example, although, and hopefully that doesn't come to pass. But we can see it in other ways as well, too. We can see how that plays out in terms of religious discrimination and persecution within the U.S., and we can watch this happen with Judaism and Islam and Christianity, and any other form of religion. And again, this is one of those things where there's the ideal out there that we aspire to, and we're not there yet, and we could do better, but it's better that we constantly aspire towards that ideal being that you can worship whatever you want, as long as it doesn't harm the people next to you. And that's what it means to be a citizen of the United States of America, whether it's Jesus or the spaghetti monster, right? Which, if you're not familiar with the flying spaghetti monster, it's a story for another day. It's a bit of a reaction to, anyways. And then I want to just read this last article, and I'll pop ahead to 5, so I can leave us some minutes to just chat. Article 33, the Establishment Clause applies to the government's conduct in relation to religious institutions. The First Amendment does not discourage, much less prohibit, religious individuals or communities from participating in public life. And this is the piece that we're kind of like, we find ourselves in a bit of a fight over right now, which with the IRS recent decision to allow pastors to promote political candidates from the pulpit. There was a lot of alliteration in there. This is where we're kind of like, we, and by we, I mean, the ELCA, but, mainline Protestants in general are trying to nail down to, which is like, that's actually the limit, okay? We as church are allowed to and encouraged to participate in civic life, except that begins to blur this when I'm telling you who to vote for, right? Which I will never do, even if I'm allowed to or not, okay? Not just because it's bad, right, in terms of all of a sudden you've got essentially whole churches being, and I'll use this word, brainwashed into voting for whichever candidate their pastor, whether he's got an education or not, wants them to vote for, but it actually discourages civic participation because you relinquish your responsibility to your leadership, okay? Contrasted with we, ELCA congregations that are heavily congregationally organized, meaning that I can't tell you what to do, the bishop can't tell you what to do, you get to be you as a congregation. I mean, there are exceptions to that, but by and large, that's how we're organized. Contrasted with, I just went on a walk with my friend Katie Pate, who's pastor at Milwaukie Presbyterian Church down the road, which she has a little bit more simultaneously rigid and loose requirements in terms of what she can do or what her congregation has to do and who has responsibility for what. It's really fascinating. Methodism, very, very more hierarchical. Anyways, okay, section 5. And this is where we start to move into synthesis. So in other words, we talked about these foundational identities, or the document has talked about these foundational identities, both of church, but then also of who the United States is. We're a constitutional form of government, and here's what our Constitution says. Talking about First Amendment is kind of the basis for a relationship between the church and the state. So what does a constructive relationship look like between the church and the state? And of course, I'm leaning heavily towards Bonhoeffer, but this is the question. It's in Article 34 that it's asking. Okay, I'm going to read just a couple again, basically 35 and 38. Work with civil authorities, in quotations, is a consequence of faithful recognition that God is at work in civic life and of the people's sovereignty as expressed in the U.S. Constitution. And then they expand on this. I don't need to ask you what this means. It means that the church and church-related organizations should work with governmental and other civic agents to address the needs of society and creation, which the U.S. Constitution describes as promoting the general welfare. This is tame, but also fascinating, because this article isn't saying anything revolutionary, but it can be revolutionary insofar as that we, at least in this document, articulate that we are called to work with our government for the good of all, essentially. Going back to this phrase that we started with way back, both in We the People, but even in the first section of this, we're called to work for the well-being of society in general, Christian or not. And that ultimately is the sticking point for a lot of this, is that we as Milwaukie Lutheran Church, if we are in adherence with what's articulated in this document, should understand that we have a responsibility to work with the city of Milwaukee, with Clackamas County, right? With whatever other governmental institutions apply in our catchment area here, to work for the betterment of our neighborhood, whether they go to our church or they don't. And I'll have to say, from an orthopraxic perspective, we do really well at this, okay? Which is evidenced by the ways in which we work with our middle school, our high school, the ways in which we work with our city. I mean, whether you're aware of it or not, my tenure here has involved a lot of interaction, not just through Scott Stover, but a lot of interaction. I've known both the past city manager, Ann Ober, and the new city manager, whose name I already forgot. I'll remember it in 15 minutes. I've gotten to know them both very well, not because I'm trying to get special benefits from Milwaukie Lutheran, although I would take that if we got it as well too, but because I understand that it's important to have a good relationship with our city, because this is our responsibility towards our neighborhood, right? And if we can work with our city rather than against our city, all the better.
Now, it doesn't say general welfare for just United States citizens, and it doesn't
Yeah.
specifically say even non-citizens.
Yeah, and realistically speaking, this is a pressure point right now, because I don't think I need to tell you that our current administration does not understand those words that way. This is isolationist America First administration that is really trying to draw a hard line of where our responsibilities lie. So they've identified that the responsibility of the U.S. government is towards this specific subset of the population, which does not include immigrants, whether they're legal or whether they're here legally or illegally, since they're revoking green cards and doing all these things that are theoretically guaranteed by our Constitution, but that's kind of out the window now. This is articulating something else. This is articulating that we bear a responsibility in promoting the general welfare that does not fall under this definition of citizen or non-citizen. And again, you could debate either way, but we're debating this because of our Christian identity. That's the important part, right? You can make an argument, and people can, decide whether it's a good argument or not, that the responsibility of the U.S. government is to citizens of the United States. You can make that argument. What this document is articulating is that we as Christians, we have a job to encourage the government to act for the welfare of people, whether they fall under that boundary of U.S. citizen or not, for many reasons, right? One of which is because what we're realizing now is that line between legal resident and illegal resident is really blurred and really hard to define. Because when you've got people that are here seeking asylum and are going through the process, right, precedent has held that they are protected because they're going through the process, okay? If they fail to participate in the process, then they're vulnerable to deportation, okay? But as long as they're going through the process, precedent for at least the past 50 years has held that since they're acting in good faith to go through that process, we're going to allow them to reside here as they're working towards being legal tax-paying citizens in the U.S. Okay, the current administration has decided to not honor that precedent. Okay, here's the problem: what makes you a citizen? Were you born? Well, that's what the federal administration is trying to challenge. Birthright citizenship. If there is no birthright citizenship, what else is there? How do you define that you're a citizen? How far back in your family tree do you have to trace people being born here to justify your legal right to participate in this society and reside here? Or my wife, who has not gotten her citizenship yet, that's a different conversation, but is here on a green card, a permanent resident status, works in the USA, pays taxes in the USA, for all intents and purposes, is the same as me, except she can't vote in elections. And yet, we have precedent. Well, the federal administration has started to revoke those green cards, has revoked those, as it has the right to do, But this is where our religious responsibility comes in, is to say, is the government doing what it says it's going to do, right? Is it doing what not just what these people say, but what our Constitution articulates? Is it upholding our Constitution?
Well,
Sorry, I'm getting on a pedestal.
That's the ultimate rub.
Yeah.
It's interpretation and who is interpreting the Constitution. Because that's where the biggest problem is sitting right there. And as for promoting the general welfare, my comment would be that my understanding is that unless you're a diplomat of a foreign nation, when you enter the soil any way, shape, or form of the U.S., you are subject to its law.
Yep. Yeah. Plain and simple.
That's promoting the general welfare. That's the best, broadest term you can.
Yeah. And not just in terms of immigration, in terms of visitation as well too. Yeah.
Anyway, you're here.
Because this is one of the consequences. Is if we start kicking people out because I don't know, they break not our laws but these arbitrary rules or just because they've got the wrong memes on their phones, then guess what? People stop coming here in general, which we're already watching happen in real time, and that has profound consequences, not just on our economy, but on our society. Right? The more and more we isolate, the worse it's going to get, in my opinion.
I have read that many U.S. citizens born here would not be able to pass the citizenship test.
Nope, absolutely not. It's not hard. It just requires some basic studying. But I mean, there are plenty of YouTube videos out there of people interviewing people on the street with questions that are on the citizenship test and being woefully ignorant of any, like, the basics, which I don't know whether that's a critique of our citizenship process or whether it's a critique of our education process in the U.S. But yeah, rules for thee and not for me, in other words. I'm going to read Article 38, and then we can jump to Section 6, and then I'll save us 15 minutes to shoot the breeze, so to speak. Article 38, the ELCA affirms healthy forms of patriotism. Okay? We are not unpatriotic. It imposes unhealthy, distorted forms of patriotism, and I think these are the important words, that divide a country and endanger it. With emphasis, division, okay? Including religious nationalism. At this time, Christian nationalism is the dominant distorted form. In other words, this is the distorted form that we see the most. Okay. It seeks to fuse selected Christian ideas, and I would even push back against the word Christian in that case, but that's me, with a comprehensive cultural framework and crosses into idolatry. It also subverts the U.S. constitutional sovereignty of we the people. So, yeah, pretty harsh language. Has anybody heard of the Seven Mountains stuff? This is just popped on my radar. I don't seek this stuff out, but it bumps into me because, it does. One of the current popular Christian nationalists' preaching points is this idea of the seven mountains of society, and that our job as Christians is to recover these. And I don't remember what all seven are, but it's like the military, the economy, schools, church, government, basically that everything should be quote unquote Christian, which, well, okay, one of my favorite quotes of all time, I have lots of good Luther quotes, but one of my favorite Luther quotes is, he asked the question, what makes a Christian shoemaker a Christian shoemaker? Is it that they put crosses on their shoes or that they make good shoes? And he obviously is articulating the second, right? If we want to claim an identity of Christian, it should be that we take pride in the quality, and I would say that the nature of who we are, and not simply because we can slap the brand of Christian on things.
Well, not to be too challenging, but is God Christian?
Well, I mean,
Is God Christian?
Andy, you're opening up a box of can of worms here. Well, yeah, but that goes right into the establishment clause, right? That goes right into the question of, and this is one of the ways in which you could justify one nation under God is that we're not necessarily defining God to be a Christian God, even though I could win pretty much any bet that most people that are in favor of that are understanding Christian God. But you can make that argument, right? Anyways, yeah. I know.
God was there before Christ was there.
I know.
So, come on, let's be real here.
You're talking about a nuanced conversation that I think is beyond our public conversation at this point in time. And this is not saying we shouldn't have that conversation. I just don't think, not us, but we as a public are capable of anything near that right now. If we can just get past the idea that Christian nationalism is bad, I think we'd be moving in the right direction, but holy Moses. But you're absolutely right, Andy. Okay, and then finally section 6. And this is, so section 5 kind of lays out the big umbrella. Like what's a healthy relationship between the church and the state? This is, let's talk, these are talking points. A few literally selected contemporary concerns, which Article 39, section 6 addresses contemporary issues in the civic life that are guided by the insights, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These articles do not revisit questions about civic life that the ELCA has already addressed in existing social statements and messages, meaning that social statement on human sexuality, social statement on abortion, social statement on poverty, all those have already been addressed by existing social statements. These last things are essentially bullet points they're bullet points of things that are important. For example, hyperpartisan polarization is exceedingly harmful to our social fabric and especially to vulnerable people. So the ELCA calls on people to insist on and practice respectful engagement. Not crazy, not radical, but for whatever reason we seem to be incapable of that. But from a practical standpoint, this is great. I love this. The idea that we the ELCA are calling we the people to talk nice to each other, to put it simply. It's wonderful, right? Agree to disagree. And I'm just, I'll pick, I guess there's not that many. How many are there? 48. I'm just picking ones at random. Article 44, governmental policies can harm or promote the well-being of society and creation. Public servants, citizens, and residents have a duty to ensure that the government remains true to, this is Dietrich Bonhoeffer, to its purpose of fostering civil well-being. Okay. 46, the ELCA laments that the past continuing mistreatment of American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian people, which often has included explicitly Christian justification. This social statement calls for increased advocacy towards tribal sovereignty, self-determination, etc., etc. You get the gist of what this section is about. It's saying we've had this big conversation. Here are a couple of important bullet points that we want to close with. So if you get a chance, and obviously I'm reading the summary here. We scroll all the way down to section 6. Right here. You will find expanded descriptions and conversations around this. Okay. I will read a little bit of this one, then we can talk, because this feels pertinent. Among the most troubling contemporary hindrances to healthy civic life in the United States at this time, this is Article 40, which I read as a summary of, is hyper-partisan polarization because it undercuts the search for collaborative solutions and significantly damages individuals and the social fabric. The U.S. political system depends on the presence and work of partisan activity. Differing interests and perspectives are normal, and the party system itself provides an avenue for organizing, educating, and advocating for issues of political concern. And then this is the paragraph I want to read. Except for a few instances, such as the Civil War, however, this partisanship did not bar cross-party work, collegiality, or friendships. Okay? Parties commonly formed coalitions, made compromises, and could work together toward their varied yet overlapping views of the common good. Working together often forged more effective ideas than working alone. How many of you find yourselves having a hard time talking to or being in relationship with people that are polarized in the opposite political direction from you? Yeah. Okay. In fact, this is the social conversation right now. Insofar as that I'm not going to throw all of the ad hominem, catchwords that get thrown out, whether it's magats or libtards or all these reprehensible, don't get me started. But we are very much in a place right now where we can't talk to each other. Not just on a congressional level, but on a personal level, to the point where we're watching relationships and families dissolve because of our inability to talk to each other. And I'm not placing blame, right? Who started it or who's responsible for it. But it's a symptom of something that we haven't seen since we fought each other over it. At that point in time, it was slavery, right? What's the issue now? And I think the darkest piece for me is there seems to be no example of good dialogue at all in any form of our federal government, and seemingly no attempt. Why? And I don't know. Susan, go ahead.
Heather Cox Richardson wrote an interesting book called How the South Won the Civil War. And a lot of the race stuff now is a direct descendant of Civil War. Or not Reconstruction, but the post-Civil War, what happened in the South.
I could give you a 45-minute explanation on how desegregation is responsible for the current evangelical platform, including abortion and anti-LGBTQ and all the things.
Virginia eliminated all public education for 5 years in the 60s because segregation was mandated.
You want to... Bob Jones University, and Liberty, 1964 or 5, something like that, was when a lot of these private Christian universities were forced to desegregate, and it's basically when, what at that time, it wasn't evangelicalism yet, but it was basically the Baptist movement pivoted from segregation as their rallying cry to eventually abortion, and then eventually, in the 80s, anti-LGBTQ stuff, It's a long story. It's very depressing. That's a story for another day. Anyways, Matt.
I think one of the things, I come from a big family, and if you count all my brothers and sisters and all the in-laws, you can find the full spectrum of American
Yep, absolutely.
I think it sort of works. We still get together. And
Yeah.
Sort of get along if everybody kind of stays in their own lane, you know. But some of the people on the fringes of that
Yeah,
do not stay in their
Yeah.
own lane.
yeah,
So I've got some in-laws particularly that seem to go out of their way to be provocative
Yeah.
on either side, you know? And they'll put stuff up like on Facebook and just say stuff or send
Yeah.
out an email to the group that's deliberately designed to make people mad
Yeah.
at them.
yeah,
And within the group, you know, if you think about, I've got 8 brothers and sisters, right? And so it's a big group of people when you can consider all the in-laws and Linda's family and such. And I think that sort of reflects kind of what's going on, that if you could sort of carve out that 10% on the far fringes, that the other 80% could actually have a pretty decent conversation, whether you identify strongly as a Republican or a Democrat or
Yeah.
whatever. You know what I mean?
yeah. I know exactly what you
It's
mean.
an interesting dynamic, and I think it sort of reflects about what this is talking about.
I think you're right. Yeah, Susan.
We're going to a reunion of my partner's Laura's family, and her 3 siblings are Trumpists.
Sure.
And Andy, her brother, specifically said, nobody's going to be allowed to talk about political things.
Okay.
Which was fine, except that then her cousin wrote Andy something about, you can't stop us from speaking politics, and then Andy started raging at Laura about how liberal attitudes were horrible. Very
I mean, there.
It'll be exciting. Or liberal attitude.
If you and here's the thing. If you think about it, it's a choice. It is a conscious choice, deciding between political identity and relationship. That's ultimately what it boils down to, across the board. You know, I think about this now. You know, I grew up in rural Northeast Michigan. The politics of Northeast Michigan have not significantly changed, okay? Insofar as that, I don't think the mindsets or the attitudes of the people who I grew up with have significantly changed. What has changed to a significant extent is the way in which people talk about it and the permission that they feel they have to be confrontational about it. I lament, I miss the days in which I didn't primarily identify people by their political affiliation. When I didn't have to know about it. When it wasn't worn as a visible identity. I mean, people would put bumper stickers and whatever. You would just roll your eyes and say, oh, he voted for him or she voted for her, whatever, you know. It was part of the flavoring of society. But now, and I will admit, when I see specific political messaging on cars, on t-shirts, I have a physical reaction. I am viscerally predisposed against that person. And it's not conscious, it's subconscious. And because I aspire to be a Christian, I will find myself trying to put myself in a mindset of, but they're a human being. And it's hard, especially for the people who are very visible, very confrontational about it. I'll give you an example. This is why it's fun being married to a French person, because it's an objective perspective on everything. We were hiking at Coldwater Lake. Has anybody been to Coldwater Lake up by Mount St. Helens? It's absolutely beautiful. It's a bit of a drive. There's a hike that we do there in the summer for reasons. One of the reasons is there's beautiful wildflowers along it. And we were in the middle of the hike. It's about 7 miles out and back. So 3.5 there, 3.5 back. And I didn't even notice it, but there was a couple coming this way. And we've got our dogs, so as soon as I see people, I'm immediately trying to get our dogs off to the side. I'm not really paying attention. Well, the guy was open carrying a pistol, and it turns out he had some political messaging on his t-shirt. I was not paying attention. But Elaine asked the question, Why? He's out for a hike with his family. Why does he have a pistol strapped to his chest? And I'm trying to explain to her, like, well, it's not illegal. Number one, this is a protected right in Oregon. You can open carry. And she's like, I know that, but why would he do this? Like, what does he feel threatened by out here? I'm like, that's a really important question to ask, isn't it?
There are potential for wildlife.
Sure, absolutely.
That's his probably justification.
That's what I told her. I told her he didn't want a cougar eating his 5-year-old. Granted, I'm not, well. Threat assessment being in question. But, this is it's not an extreme example. It's an example of how we just perceive the world now, which is our brains, as soon as we meet somebody, and maybe I'm a bit of an exception here because of my demographic, but I immediately start doing the math. Which side are they on? It's not intentional. It's not even conscious. My hindbrain, which is trying to assess threats, is automatically going, okay, what do they look like? What kind of clothes are they wearing? How do they talk? What words do they use? In which ways are they signaling a political identity? And are they safe for me? And I hate that. I hate it. It makes it harder for me to see God in them.
Right,
It's
but,
intimidating to have somebody walking towards you with a gun.
I know it is.
And maybe that's the purpose.
I think you're not wrong. Andy.
okay, my statistics may be old, but a person doing what he was doing
Yeah.
is at greater risk to his family and himself for a firearm-related injury than anywhere else.
Statistically speaking, it's a greater threat to his family than it is to anybody else.
Right, and it's just, but you can't get beyond, it's my right, I have, and I'd say, yes, my point of view, and I think I'm constantly
I know.
correct, would be this. Yes, please have your musket ready and primed.
Yeah.
And end it right there, because that's it,
Yeah.
there's nothing else.
Yeah. Oh, and sorry I brought firearms into the conversation, but it's an example. It's an example. And just to say that, all of you have probably default categories of things that you look for that signal political affiliation. Firearms is one of them. But how many different, which car you drive, unfortunately, whether or not there's a flag anywhere on your, which again is the most unfortunate of all things. Don't get me started on flag etiquette.
Yeah, that's mine, is the big flag, big
Yeah.
flag on the back.
Yeah.
All ratty and dirty and.
We were out sailing with our friends, and there was a boat that had an American flag hanging into the water, and I was just like, whatever. Anyways, Susan, Mike, go ahead.
It used to be you never had to worry about asking anybody who they were.
I know. It wasn't even part of the conversation.
Wasn't even the
Yeah.
part of the conversation.
And now it's constantly in the back of our minds, to the point where you start reading micro behaviors. How much of my brain now is dedicated unintentionally to that, to figuring out which line they're on. Anyway, Susan, then we should probably.
I have a friend whose 80-year-old-ish brother in Texas is an attorney. And he was surprised when she brought up the fact that the Second Amendment talks about a well-regulated militia.
Yeah.
And, where does that phrase allow anybody to have an AK, whatever it is?
Well,
They can have a musket.
That's what Andy was articulating.
because it says firearms. And the firearm at that time was a brown vest musket. It was ungrooved. I could fire here at Mike. I could probably hit that. I could hit
Yeah.
anyone within a 40-foot circle.
Yeah, because it wasn't rifled. Yeah.
And if you're talking a pistol,
It's a lead
you
ball.
might as well have if you really are going to be protecting yourself with a pistol, you better have about a 3-foot bayonet on the end of it, because that bayonet's better than the pistol.
That's why they were so close. And
Yeah, you're not wrong.
See the whites of their eyes.
Yeah.
You better see their tooth.
Yeah. So I'll close by saying, and again, the Second Amendment is one of many, many issues. But what this document is articulating, I think the important thing is, again, going back to that we the people. What is the definition of the Second Amendment that is right? Well, it's whatever we the people agree on, right? I mean, that's the point, is that is a protected part of our Constitution, but that language is just a starting point for the conversation that we the people have around what we feel comfortable with in terms of people carrying firearms, right? And this is the thing at the end of the day that I think is so important is, and again, I'm leaving out an important part, which is the interpretation by the courts, which that's a whole other bag of worms right now. But it's all for the intent of us collectively determining what we feel is healthy and safe and respectful, wherein I can be me, but it doesn't hurt you, right?
Yeah, that's sort of the bottom line. I always think, as far as we have a safe voting system,
Yeah.
we the people, have voted in
Yep.
this administration.
Yep.
We the people have been promised certain things.
Yeah.
And we the people, I think, that's our democratic system.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure where to go with that,
Yeah.
but that's who the majority, it might be a minor majority, that's who the majority
It's
is.
a plurality,
The plurality. Yeah. The plurality.
But that's our voting system.
yeah.
And whether they're attempting to corrupt that voting system.
Yeah. That's a whole other question.
Another issue. But our current voting system is we the people, first line. And fact of life. So it's education and social media and act to convince we the people in the next voting cycle next year
Yeah.
to vote differently. That's what
Or just vote.
we-
That would be my starting point.
We the people.
Is no matter my political ideologies and how they differ from others, ultimately I have more respect for people who vote differently than I do than those who sit out because neither candidate fits their viewpoint. And I shouldn't demonize, but ultimately it's because of a lack of education regarding these responsibilities, a lack of understanding of what it means to participate in this, Like, if your family's getting together to get dinner and you're trying to figure out where you're going to eat at and you don't speak up, you can't complain about where you go. That's my opinion, right? If you don't give your voice, then you don't have a voice. And yet, apparently we can't do any better than 40% participation in the general election. But whatever. All right, folks. I got to get to worship. Yeah, thank you all of you for participating in this. I'll see you at the end of August, but we'll start back up again with something new.